Welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitrov. Thomas, we are both back at our place of residence. I'm at an apartment here in Atlanta. You're back at your house. We did have some technical difficulties on the last podcast when we were in the Atlanta studio. We will get that resolved, by the way, before we have our draft show. But it's really been fun, Thomas, just to hang out with you for the past few days to talk football. You got to see that I was watching some film on old Dallas Cowboys during lunch today. It's been a good time, Thomas. Are you ready to talk tight ends today?
I'm ready to talk. Let me start by saying I am so happy to be back in my comfort zone, us looking at each other this way instead of the side of your face the whole day. We're going to have to get ready for that for the big show, but we're going to set it up. We'll keep it as a surprise, but hopefully we'll have it set up properly for our big show. I am ready to talk. Can I say this quickly? It has been great hanging out with you. I told you today when we were hanging out in between lunch, I thought this is great, having a few people here. But I just want everyone to know, because I got to fit it in somewhere. You, fun going out to dinner with. We were at Umi last night, one of the best sushi places in the world. And to see you impale sushi with a fork versus a set of chopsticks is like monumental in my mind. That's the only word I could come up with.
Yeah, I felt less than sophisticated hanging out with you and Jack last night. That was as one of my good friends, Dave, so far, I would say a privilege. It's sort of funny, like, you are, aspirational for me as far as you're very cultured, but you do have a similar upbringing to what I had, kind of Midwest and, you work very hard, and there's sort of not, and I feel similarly. And yet at the same time, like, and like I went to college, got a PhD, like was a professor for a while. I have I have tastes in a lot of ways. Like I read a lot of books and stuff, and yet like I can't use chopsticks. Like I'm horrible at it. I go to the waiter last night. I'm like, hey, can I have a fork? And everybody is at, you guys are kind of looking at me. And granted, you and Jack were very gracious and, didn't snarl at me. But there were a couple times it's like, my big fingers were having a hard time with those chopsticks. So that was a good time.
I loved it. It is exactly right. We all have our ways of approaching things. Another very quick one that everyone needs to know. We're eating lunch today. Your guy here had a great salad, full on salad. And with the right hand, he's taken a couple chops of a really good Whole Foods chocolate chip cookie. That was like your bun, or that was your croissant, or whatever you're eating with it, right? I thought it was an amazing mix of carbohydrate and really good chicken salad, or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, it's weird though. Like the last two times I've been in Atlanta, and both Wednesdays, weirdly. So the last time I was in Atlanta, we went Wednesday, Thursday. Middle of the day Wednesday, I'm just not feeling that great. I did take a nap here for about 45 minutes. I do feel better. I would say, when I turned on the podcast to sort of like open up the stream, I looked like hell. Now I just look maybe like purgatory right now as opposed to hell. But I feel a little bit better. It's been weird, but yeah, we got our great salad there. There's a bunch of great places in Atlanta, frankly, and they have a Caribou coffee for my Minnesota roots, as well as any of the listeners here. By the way, okay, before we get on to tight ends here, we are streaming live on Twitter. We are streaming live on YouTube. This is the first podcast. We are streaming live on Twitch. I've been inspired by some of my friends to get on that platform. So those of you who are on Twitch or prefer it that way, welcome. We really like having you here. And again, like wherever you listen to your podcasts, we hope to be the number one place for traditional ways of looking at football, as well as the analytical ways of looking at football. And we're going to look at the tight end position. And I think this is fun because, Thomas, you as a team builder, both as the director of college scouting with New England as well, and there's my friend Nick Wan, who is the director of analytics for the Reds and also a Twitch streamer, saying hello from Twitch. So we do at least have somebody from Twitch, which is amazing. You were, as a team builder, built some teams with some tight ends, right? Daniel Graham, New England, Ben Watson, New England. David Thomas from New England as well, Garrett Mills, who had a brief moment with New England as well as Minnesota and Cincinnati. And then when you were with Atlanta, all over the place, right? So Ben Hartsock, you also had, Austin Hooper, Tony Gonzalez, and Hayden Hurst, you traded draft picks for, Levine Toilolo, and like Jacob Tammy, who like randomly had some moments as the backup to Dallas Clark, and I think also as a backup with Denver. So you had your experience there, and of course I played 2 seasons of tight end at the Division II college level at Minnesota State. So this is going to be a fun podcast just from our experiences alone.
This will be fun, to your point, and I love the tight end position. I love talking about it. I remember, I hate doing this, and I know you don't. I mean, when you look back and playing at whatever level you played at, and as a former very small and slow defensive back, I always claim myself to be a little quick, but it doesn't really matter. To cover an adept tight end, man, was a bear. And most people know that, right? I love it because I think it's such a high percentage shot. I think they add such intelligence if you have the right tight end to your game. By the way, we'll get into that a little bit. It was one of the things that Bill Belichick drilled into our heads. Do not come back to me in New England with a dumb tight end. Ergo, your tight end and mathematical genius side. I think it's really, really important. So make sure you're thinking about building with those smart guys who have an understanding of the game. Really, really important.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why, let's lay out the financials for a second first, right? Because we talked about this before, we'll link back to this show. We talked about evaluating the position a month or so ago. Mm-hmm. But like one of the reasons that drafting a tight end is so hard, and one of my former colleagues at Pro Football Focus posted this, like it's a hard position to acclimate to well at the beginning. So when you look at guys who have been drafted high, they almost never they don't end up being busts from a career standpoint, but they do end up at times not doing what they were promised to do when they played for the team that drafted him. So you think about Kyle Pitts so far, he had a 1,000-yard season as a rookie, which is a really good accomplishment. Only Mike Ditka has done so as a tight end in the NFL as a rookie, but by and large hasn't lived up to the 4th overall pick so far. You look at TJ Hawkinson, he's already been traded. In fact, Detroit had 3 tight ends taken in the first round in the last 12 years or so. Brandon Pettigrew, Eric Ebron, and TJ Hawkinson, all of whom kind of didn't pan out with the Lions. But in the case of Ebron, in the case of Hawkinson, have both done pretty well in their subsequent teams. Even a guy like Greg Olsen, who was a pretty good player for the Bears, when he got to your division rival, Carolina, that's really when he became a superstar at the NFL level.
And Eric, I'm hoping you're still there. I know you are in an Airbnb in Atlanta, so I want to make sure you can still hear. You are cutting out. Can you hear us, Airbnb guy?
I can hear you, and I am monitoring the internet over here. It's not great, but hopefully we can continue to hold on here.
Can I comment on one thing as you're talking? Actually, I just want to say, like, all of those players you're talking about who leave certain teams and go to another team, to me, that's the acquiring team, understanding how they're going to use those players, understanding usually when they acquire one of those players, they've kind of been on the downside of their tight end situation. So usually those guys are like a step up. They get excited about them. They rejuvenate that player by coming into a new team. Hayden Hurst was that way with us. Hayden Hurst left, unfortunately. He goes to Cincinnati, plays some pretty darn good ball, signs a nice contract, of course, with Carolina, which is good. But I just want to say that a lot of times there are guys that are, solid, but then they reach another peak. You're talking about Olsen. I think the world of him. I think as a player, I think what he did to us, man, we were on the back of, just always on our edge playing Carolina with him when he was healthy. So really, really important thing. I love talking about them because I realize how important they end up being to the team, right? I know I mentioned that earlier on. So looking forward to digging into this for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And do you think that it's partially like wide receiver where if you take a tight end that high, you expect him to be everything? Like you expect him to be on the line of scrimmage, being able to block and also running the patterns where if you take a guy later in the draft, you expect him to be kind of half a tight end, right? Like where he can be in line and be a blocking kind of guy, the Ben Hartsock to you guys in Atlanta versus, let's say, like I even think of like Mark Andrews. He was drafted 3rd round in the same year that Hurst was drafted in the 1st round by the Ravens. And, he was able to sort of grow into that position because the expectations weren't that high early on. And he's still not a great blocker, but he, is a good enough at the receiving spot to sort of work out. And, the guys that are drafted high, like one of the things with Pitts is like, Pitts is great at the wide receiver stuff, but you drafted him to be an all-around tight end. And so there's always going to be a little disappointment because expectations, to your point, are too high. And so that's an issue. Even, one of the best tight ends to ever play the game, Rob Gronkowski, was drafted in round 2 out of Arizona by the Patriots. That's not a top draft pick. And hence, and even in that same draft, the Patriots drafted the late Aaron Hernandez in the round 4. And like those guys complemented each other really well until Gronk emerged to be the kind of be everything tight end. And so there's expectation setting too. Even with Austin Hooper, one of your, I think, better draft picks, and in fact, like a very good player, caught a touchdown in your Super Bowl against New England. Mm-hmm. He was there to complement Levine Toilolo. He was not asked to be everything.
That's exactly right. And I would say, the expectations, yes. Interestingly enough, if you go back historically, and I was thinking in the earlier part of my career, run the data on it and how few tight ends were taken really high, right? Because there was a value of them, getting them in the mid-2nd to the mid-3rd round, to what you were alluding to earlier, and specifically, a mentioning on some of these guys. And now we're in the spot like we were with Julio, when a lot of people skewered me for moving up as much. Why would you ever utilize a pick that high? We're getting to a spot with this group of general managers and team builders, in my mind, where people are saying it's a short-lived game, short-lived career. I'm getting the best damn player at the best position I can get for the most part, if they're going to impact. And now tight ends, you look at it right now, you're seeing those waves of tight ends going in the 1st round, right? And people are justifying whether they work out or not. They're feeling like they want to do that. Now, look, let's bring it back quickly to Pitts, in Atlanta, and what they did. What they took him 4th overall, right? It was a big time move. He is a rare athlete, but to your point, usually when we take tight ends this high, not that high, even the middle of the 1st round, you want the all complete guy, right? You want the, at least, again, remember, you want the 6 blocker, you want the 7 or 8 athlete. Again, that's very good or excellent to rare. You want that combination because you want the all encompassing. You're rarely going to get that, of course. There are very few guys out there. If they do go high. You might get a very good athlete back in the day in the middle of the 2nd round. Now those very good athletes who are solid at blocking, and solid means, right down the middle, adequate, above average, they do go in the 1st round. And let me just mention this, and we're going to get into this, please. Rarely do you have a very, very accomplished and consistent blocker that comes into the NFL. Even the best guys, it is a completely different world. And this is a big thing. We get talking about tight ends. I don't know how many go-arounds I had with guys like Dirk Cutter, and he would be defending his tight ends all the time about, how they were blocking well. And I'm like, this guy is falling off the block. He's falling onto the ground. How can you say he's a good blocker? And his response as a longtime coordinator was, they're never good, Thomas. They're never good blockers. All they need to be for us is adequate. This is a really interesting topic of conversation on the expectations of blocking.
Well, it's crazy because, I remember 2007, I'm sitting in the film room and, we were a spread offense, and that, I would say 50% of the time we played 4 wide receivers, 50% of the time we played 3 wide receivers with me at tight end or H. And I was watching, and I'm like, when I'm in line, I'm just bringing somebody into the box, and I'm turning it. And this is my mathematical mind. I'm like, I'm turning a sure win into a 9. And I was a pretty good blocker. Like I could, I was very good with angles and all that stuff, but I was 90% guy. So why in the world, if you have and it's not as easy as this, right? And when you're playing H back and all that stuff, it's better. But like, why in the world would you take a guy who's in the slot that's moving a player out of the box and basically effectively eliminating him from the run game. Why would you take him and put him in line and make that win-loss a 90-10 instead of 100-0, right? Like, and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, and I wasn't the greatest pass receiver, nor was the offense suited at all to give me the football. Like, I was very much a, back of the end zone on play action in the red zone kind of guy, a screen guy, that thing. I was not changing the calculus in the passing game the way that some of these great tight ends we're going to talk about today are. And so, like, what benefit was the offense having of me in the box other than just to kind of change it up? Like, that's the thing. Like, my issue is if you're going to have a tight end on the field, there's got to be something that he's adding from a passing game standpoint or a run game standpoint that's better than just taking that edge player or that force player on the outside and either taking him off the field completely and putting in another safety or a corner, or having him detached and not involved in the run game at all. Like, that's how good. Like, I'm actually the complete opposite of Dirk Cutter. I'm saying because none of these guys can really block that well, to have them on the field, they have to be so good at eliminating those guys backside of run plays. They have to be able to cross the line of scrimmage. I was showing you a play on, like, my favorite play. They got to be able to cross the line of scrimmage and wham block that defensive end that you're leaving unblocked on power. They have to be able to do all that kind of stuff better than adequately, because otherwise you can just, like, kind of through space eliminate those players on the defensive side of the ball.
Yep. No, you've hit the nail on the head here. And look, it's been an ongoing debate within personnel departments and coaching staffs, how you're going to utilize the tight ends. As I've mentioned before, we would have seminars within the coaching and personnel realms, and we'd be talking about it, sharing ideas. When we would go out and evaluate, we had an idea of what we were looking for in the upcoming draft. And when we're out scouting, of course, from GM all the way down to our area scouts, it was imperative that the head coach and his staff made sure that they disseminated the right information, basically, right? Because we needed to know specifically what they're looking for. And look, on the blocking side, remember what we said in our seminar before. Yes, if you get that really athletic guy who is the X, F type of tight end, and then you get the F and the Y combination as your number two, who can do both well in the good category, and then you get one Y tight end who's just a banger. That's usually how you want your spread to be if you have three tight ends going, right? Yep. You need that blocker somewhere, and that's very important.
Yeah, and there's still a pretty big push. Like, I remember New England Super Bowl in 2014, Cameron Fleming played like in the AFC title game and the Super Bowl played, dozen or so snaps at tight end as a tackle. And, I do think that if you're going to wear an 80s number and you're not going to be like a great receiver, and people think that you are going to, you're not a threat in the passing game, you might as well have a sixth offensive lineman in there. Like, and to the point of kind of roster building, your offensive line plays the whole game. All five guys generally play 100 snaps, 100% of the snaps. So there's also a team building aspect to having a sixth offensive lineman that can play, because he's going to get play time and actually have, an impact on the game. So there's almost, it's weird, but like I said, like, I think the bar for tight end play is so high because there are other ways to replace you. The slot receiver, fullback, second running back, and now sixth offensive lineman. Like, when we look at these guys, and let's start with Michael Mayer, who I'm gonna put up this graphic here. Michael Mayer is currently the favorite to be the first tight end taken, Notre Dame tight end. He is minus 120 to be the first tight end taken. Minus 120, for those who are new to betting, we are not necessarily a betting show, but that's about a 54.5% implied. If you believe he's going to be first, you want to make that bet. That's the implied that you have to have. Michael Mayer, when you look at the grinding the mocks data, he is an average draft position in the grinding the mocks data by our friend Ben Robinson at 24.1. So, you look at Mayer, he's going to be, the first tight end taken in all likelihood, but he's not going to go until the second, the third basically of the first round. He's a guy, when you look at him from Notre Dame, about a little under 6'4", 250 or so, 4.7 40, 32.5 inch vertical, 9.10 broad. So when you're looking at it from an athlete perspective, big, fast enough, strong. When I watch him play, like everybody looks at the 87, and it's probably a good tactic if you're a college tight end to wear that number if you're a big white guy. He did kind of look like Gronk a little bit, but Gronk is somebody that is going to be hard to match, right? And so when I watched him, I thought, this is a guy who looks like the whole package, can block, but as a receiver, he's very tough. He takes hits. He didn't shy away really from any of the route concepts a tight end would have to run at the NFL level. But he's not going to be that rare athlete that some of these other guys are.
He's not going to be the rare athlete. Let me start by saying I appreciate your assessment. I will say that All-American, right? All world guy and all that great stuff about him. My biggest concern is 24 does seem right for him-ish, right? 24, 25, 26. But I personally think there's a guy that I would take in front of him because, and we'll get to that person. I just believe that there are limitations on Mike, though he is, I believe, a very good football player with an all-encompassing element to him. The blocking ability, the power to move, the power to get his butt around and steer. We talk about that. It's important for a guy who's not an offensive lineman. He's the closest guy to be able to help you in chip off ability, et cetera, et cetera. I am quite honestly most concerned about his lack of pure fluidity and athleticism, right? Now, you don't need the 9 athlete or the 8 athlete or the rare or the excellent athlete. You can have the good athlete. I'm still in the spot right now, Eric, where I'm trying to decide, is he a good athlete or is he an above average athlete? And that makes a difference for me in the first round. I definitely want a good athlete. And there are times when I see limitations in his adjustment, his ability to catch the ball and turn up the field. He's not a make you miss guy, of course. He'll run you over, which I love. I just think his value is honestly a little bit later in the first round. I see where it might be here. A guy like this in the past might have gone in the beginning of the second round. Like him a lot. Know there are limitations, but I think he's going to have a long career in this league, and he's going to do some really good stuff as a starter in this league.
Do you think, production-wise at Notre Dame, 2.44 yards per route run, which is first in college football among tight ends, but when you look at that Notre Dame offense, pretty desolate as far as other options to go to. Like, he was their number one player as far as an option in the passing game. So he was productive, and that's awesome, but he was really all they had. Only 8.1 yards average depth of target. We're going to get to a guy in Luke Musgrave later who was much more of a down the field guy. Only 5 yards yak per catch, which again, like, he will run you over, but he won't run around you. To me, when I think about, and you're right. I mean, like, I think when I'm watching him, I'm like, man, he looks like he looked like what Heath Miller looked like at the NFL level. The problem is Heath Miller did it at the NFL level versus doing it at the college level where guys are not quite as athletic. You can be a first round tight end if you are of the Mercedes Lewis, Heath Miller ilk athletically, but it's not going to be as easy for you. And we've seen, like, those guys had long careers, but they weren't necessarily like all pro type players at position.
Good football players, not necessarily all pro. Do you need to be all pro? Again, you would like it. We were talking last night about your best friend, the quarterback that you laud every time we are anywhere trying to get people on your side, Baker Mayfield. We were talking about that. That's a whole other topic of 30 and 30 or whatever we talked about. What are you expecting out of a tight end, right? Are you expecting him to be a difference maker? I believe in the top 20 you are a difference maker, whatever that definition is. Again, remember, everyone, it is imperative as a rising exec, if you ever get in this spot, what your expectations are, and that is having that unbelievably direct conversation with your owner. What are you expecting in these draft picks? And I say that on a tight end. Just because you draft a tight end at 24 or 20, you better make sure you know what his expectations are, because if he's not ripping it up, that's a whole different story. All of a sudden, you have a guy who might be a blunder. By the way, we used to have that. Bust and blunder is a very different, semantically, it's a very different word, of course, in a classification. which we could lead into another time with Baker Mayfield.
Baker Mayfield, maybe not a bust, maybe not a blunder, but also not a hit, right? I think we're coming to agreement here on that a little bit. By the way, I did get one person semi on my side last night, which felt like a win for me. But that was it wasn't, it's not going to be perfect.
You got him on your side. You got him on your side. And it was Jack Easterby, just so everyone knows. I mean, we're not going to get into Jack joined us. Great seeing him again. Jack is a very intelligent guy. By the way, he's got different perceptions as you do on things. I would only say, hey, there's opportunities to talk to people across the league on it. And I think it's interesting. You got someone on your side.
There's real signal in the fact that the Browns didn't have any interest in signing him to a deal. That to me is the big feather in your cap in being he wasn't he didn't have a great 4 years. So the next one, and I think this is the one that you think should go first. And in fact, this is where, and now we're not giving out gambling advice on this show, but Dalton Kincaid out of Utah is plus 140 to be. So basically, if you are to bet, it's $100 to win 140 if he goes first tight end. He, in grinding the mocks, is only 2 draft positions behind Michael Mayer at 26.1. When I watch him, I see a very fluid athlete. I see a very impressive player who, second among tight ends in yards per route run, just a little bit behind Michael Mayer in an offense that had more weapons, frankly, in Utah than Notre Dame had. So he has to fight for more targets. A better yak at 5.7. He only dropped less than 3% of his passes. So that to me is a really, really good mark as far as when you're moving that fast as a tight end. We didn't see any combine measurements, but this is maybe a question for you, Thomas. No combine measurements. So you're going off of film almost completely as far as what kind of athlete he is. What do you think of Dalton Kincaid out of Utah?
Well, let me make this clear. You said no combine measurements. Did he measure at his pro day? Did he get all the data at his pro day?
I do think he tested at his pro day.
Look it up while we're talking. I would say when you don't get combine information, it is a big deal. You want to find out why. Was he aching? Was he waiting? Remember, everyone, a lot of these guys who are on the verge, they think they need an extra week, 3 weeks, whatever it is, to get in prime shape because they are hanging off of those numbers. It used to irritate the hell out of us, right? Work out. Be a stud, be a dude, but the reality is in today's world, there's so much riding on it. So if you don't get them at the combine, you definitely better get them. And there are a lot of people out there, if they don't have complete files on their guys. I mean, I know that Dave Caldwell and the people over at Indianapolis, when Dave was with Indianapolis as a young scout, Bill Polian, they would not draft someone if they didn't have all the information. Really interesting topic. Do you really do that or not?
Yeah, he had a small fracture in his back. And so he was even just an observer at his own pro day. So you're probably going to have to get a little bit in the way of another private workout to get numbers on him. But that's a really tough one, right? Like this has been going back forever as far as players who, productive, the Pac-12, this is a good one. You used to scout the West, as you said. This is another one where, the Pac-12, what kind of competition is he going up against? Because that could make him look better on film. But right now, he was just an observer at both the combine and his pro day. So this is one where we don't have athleticism on him. So we really just have his tape, which I think he does have the tape of a very good tight end. But is that enough?
Well, this is where you separate yourself, I believe, as a very good scout on your scouting staff. When your GM can look at you and have you sift through what you know and what you don't know and truly hone in on the movement, the ability that you watch from a game to game, right? Because in the end, any of us with old school, like a lot of experience in this, we are not getting away from the fact that it is what this cat does on the field, how he moves around. Okay, you can project on and at times, Eric, over project on who the talent was, right? But if you're seeing a guy like this, given his athleticism, I think he's a very good athlete. Again, just to keep everyone in tune with our grading scale, I think he's a 7. I don't think he's an 8, being he's not a excellent athlete or a rare athlete as 9, but a very good athlete who moves well, catches a ball, can run, can make people miss, has that good speed about him, has the fluidity and ability to adjust and catch the ball around him. All the good things that you want, I think is very good. That gives him, 7s in that area. It brings him down. Let's call this now back to this scenario. You look at him and you say, is he, however, better than being, again, adequate or above average as a 5, right? And I would suggest he's a 5 blocker, meaning, okay, so there's a difference there, right? If you're looking for that athletic guy, do I think this guy has the ability and the movement and the upside continue to grow to be a top 20 pick? I think he's in the 20s. And you feel good going home. You think he's going to be really effective for you. I like where he is. I like everything to do with him. Yes, I'm interested to know how bad the injury was, but I'm projecting in my mind, watching him, thinking this guy can do it in the league. And so I'm looking forward to seeing. I would personally look at him and think, again, contingent on what you're looking for with your offense. If you're looking for what I think you'd be looking for, a difference maker and an athletic guy who can also, get across there, make his contact. Let me make this very clear, brother. I'm not talking, in no way is he wimpy or a coward in any way. I'm saying he's not a banger as a blocker, but he will come in there with some speed on his ass and make contact and get his butt around and do what he needs to do to steer as he can because his feet are so quick. Those are some of the things I look, and he doesn't get just, waylaid or thrown aside. He has the body control to grab himself and stay with the block, right? Very important. He's not going to bang people like Michael Mayer. I get it.
Yeah, and there are also parts like, you have to be able to get off the line of scrimmage if you're playing a Y position, right? At that spot at tight end, and the being able to block is correlated with that, right? Like if an edge defender is going to jam you at the line of scrimmage on pass plays, like are you able to get an outside release when you need to get an outside release on plays like that? That's another part of, like, you want your team, like if you're a tight end, you want your team to be able to win in as many ways as possible. And if they need to detach you for you to run certain routes, that's obviously not optimal. Here's a guy that didn't play a ton last year. By the way, this is one of the players who, when we look at the tracking metrics, was one of the better athletes in all of college football when he did play. Luke Musgrave of Oregon State. Go Beavers. Corvallis, one of the coolest college towns of all time, I would say. 6'6", 250. Runs a 4.61, 36-inch vert, 10 broad. That's an athlete, right? Like, that's a very good athlete at the position. Averaged almost 4 yards per route run last year in limited time. In 2021 was not productive, but he had one thing going for him. And this is one thing I want you to talk about, Thomas. 13 yards average depth of target in 2021, 12.4 last year. This is a guy that goes down the football field as a tight end. And when you think about why is this guy on the field? He's on the field to stretch out the safeties, open up the offense. This guy has those markers both athletically and then statistically. When you watch Luke Musgrave, what did you think?
Okay, let me start by saying I like Luke Musgrave. I think he's a good football player all around, right? Size, what you're talking about, just the pure athleticism, the number athleticism. Let's call it the way it is. And by the way, let me just give my guy who I have a lot of respect. I've always liked Bill Musgrave. This is his nephew. He's got Musgrave intelligence in his blood, which is great. So I'm pulling for this kid. What he does, he's not the most, yes, he has the numbers and everything. He gains speed, right? He's not again the explosive stop-start guy. Put his foot in the dirt, shake people and everything. He's not going to do that. That's not his style. Big kid, covers a lot of ground, gets deep, as you know, catches balls, tracks balls, fundamentally very sound. Unfortunate. What, he had 2 games this year? That was a little bit unfortunate. But again, he's a good football player. He's going to have a very productive career as long as he stays healthy, of course. And, again, when you're talking about an athlete, I think he's a 6 athlete. I've never looked at him saying that he was a 7. That's probably more because I'm a big believer in that athleticism is whole, right? It's not just a 40 time. It's not just a vert. It is the ability to control the body. It's fluidity of movement. It's the explosiveness. And I tell my scouts, I told our scouts, not my scouts. I hate that. I told our scouts all the time, if you have an athlete and you're grading him in the 7s and the 8s or at the top end of it, and they are gradual movers, there is no way that you can justify in our system that he is, that excellent or the rare athlete. And I don't think he possesses that. However, I think on the blocking side, he's not a banger either, but he puts himself into it and he will put the effort forth. So, look, I think this guy in an ideal situation, does he get out in the back end of the second or first round? Possibly. Ideally for us, as I said yesterday or 2 days ago, he's probably an early deuce, second round, but he does get up there. He has a chance. I'm cheering for him.
Yeah, and you think about even the best tight end in the NFL right now, Travis Kelce, for a year or two was the 2 tight end on the Chiefs behind Anthony Fasano, right? Like you do want to, like if you take a guy in the first round, he's not going to be your second tight end. He's going to be your first tight end. You take a guy in the second or third round, he's going to be able to, if you go somewhere with a guy, an ace tight end that is able to do some of the dirty work and you're able to sort of grow into that position, that's a very good place to be in. When you talk about a gradual mover, I think about, and again, like this is back to my playing days. I'm looking at guys and I'm like trying to emulate players, but I always thought Mercedes Lewis was that guy where there's nothing sudden about Mercedes Lewis. But when you watched him, his second 20 yards in the 40 were much more impressive than his first 20 yards in the 40. And that's tough when you're playing in a phone booth a lot at a tight end where you do need to have some quickness and some choppiness to you to be able to make plays.
As impressive as a 4.85 Mercedes Lewis can be in any part of his speed, because he wasn't that, right? We'll have a guy we're going to talk about a little bit later in the broadcast here, who is much more Mercedes Lewis-like body-wise, but was faster, right? A couple tenths maybe, interesting enough. And that's a whole different story. But yes, on that. When I say gradual mover, just so everyone knows, I'm talking about the ability to come out of the blocks. I'm talking about the explosiveness versus, a little bit of a loping element, right? There's a difference there, right? Longer, levered, loping. And you compare him, which I think is a very different movement than Michael Mayer. I mean, I didn't say this and I don't want to slam Michael, but Michael's got what we say in the scouting world. He's got some heavy leggedness. I don't even know if leggedness is a word. JT O'Sullivan's going to be mad because he's going to say, see, can't even use the right word, leggedness. We say that often in the scouting vernacular, but he does. He's a little heavy, low. He's got some pounding to him and lumbering to him. Yeah. He's not, I don't find, when we're talking about Musgrave as a lumberer, I just think he's just more gradual.
Yeah, there's guys who run smoothly that aren't necessarily fast. And that is, or quick, but they're smooth. Like when you watch some guys run, it's like, oh, that looks like it hurts, but they could be fast. And then there are guys who run and it like looks very smooth, but they're not that fast. Like I always think about, there are just like some wide receivers that are like that who run very smoothly, but they're not fast, and so it's weird. But I get what you're saying. Michael Mayer, by the way, this is like sort of this difference, right? The best tight end in the NFL right now, Travis Kelce, is not a red zone guy. He's not a box you out and catch the ball like a basketball player type player. He's a separator. Mm-hmm. Michael Mayer is very much more of a Gronk where he'll get his ass in between you and the ball, and like that and you don't necessarily need to separate quite as much. Thomas, are you showing off your drinks here, or are you just like getting out of the sun here?
Please. I'm trying to get over here because this sun is killing me. I can't find my spot. This is even probably.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry about that, everyone.
No, it's all good. And then you have Lady Liberty behind you.
Lady Liberty, but there was a couple bottles or decanters of tequila when anyone ever comes by. Hopefully, get you over here before you leave.
I can't wait. I have not been drinking in a while. I feel like my skin looks like I haven't had a drink in like 25 days or something, but not before I took a shower earlier. All right. We talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba on Monday. We talk about don't scout the helmet. It's going to be really hard not to scout the helmet here because Sam LaPorta from Iowa, 6'3", 245, kind of the same size as one George Kittle, 4.59 40, pretty fast for tight end, 35-inch vertical, 10 broad, 4.25 shuttle, which I actually think is, and when you look at the tracking data, our great data scientist, Pavel Babicek, Udit Ranazaria, looking at the tracking data coming up, one of the more impressive athletes just by looking at that model. So there's a lot of boxes checked here for Mr. LaPorta. There's also been, of course, Hawkinson now being a very useful tight end in the NFL for the Vikings, Kittle being a 5th-round pick for the 49ers, being probably the best all-around tight end in football. There's a little bit of an impulse to want to project here. I look at him 7th in college football in yards per route run last year. Not a long, not a great like down the field guy, but that's an Iowa offense that doesn't like going down the field. Drop rate about 9.4%, which is high for a tight end. You don't want that. So a mixed bag here, but there's some positives to Sam LaPorta.
I like Sam LaPorta. I think he's a very good athlete. I think he's right up there with the better athlete in this draft that we're talking about, because I gave him both that 7 mark, the very good athlete. I think he moves smoothly. He runs his route. I just happened to be watching a little bit earlier his movement in the combine, and I really liked watching what he could do, right? Strictly in the combine. Watching him on the field, there are times where I'm thinking, gosh, where is he? What is he truly as far as a difference maker? Comes from I love the program. I love Kirk Ferentz. I love anything to do with it. I know he's, there are times people want to take their shots, but what they usually get out of an Iowa player is usually they're getting someone who's got a lot of talent. Usually they understand football. They have a passion for football. I'm lauding you Midwesties, of course, but I like this football player. I think he's a 2nd rounder. I think he can be a good developing starter in this league. And to your point, he doesn't come out and rip it up in year 1, but he develops well. If I understand, I have not, of course, dug into his character, which I used to do. And that helped me a lot, by the way, as scouts. It's such a good feeling to know when you have a guy who works his tail off every second of the day, usually like a lot of the Iowa guys do. You want to give him a check mark there, right? You'll take him any day. I can't speak to that, but I do think this guy's effectiveness on the field. Of course, he's not a big-time blocker. He'll put his nose in there enough. He'll work it, like I said, like any of these very good athletes. But he's in that 5 range as a blocker, adequate range as a blocker. I think, again, good football player. I think he's a 2nd rounder. I'd build with him.
It's interesting, right? Like, I don't want to go 12 rounds on this idea, but I do want to bring it up. Like, one of my friends, Sage Rosenfels, who's an Iowa kid, he played at Iowa State. He contends, and he and I have sort of thought this idea through, that for some NFL positions, playing at some of these schools that are not as, for lack of a better term, explosive, can often be better for you, right? So, if you're trying to play tight end at USC, or you're trying to play tight end at, I think UCLA is actually fine, but like there's a lot of these sort of more schools on the coasts where you're not playing an NFL, you're not playing tight end like you would in the NFL. So the adjustment period is going to be so much different. In college football, it's not optimal to play a NFL pro style offense because of the hash marks and because of the speed and because of the scarcity at the position, right? Like there are only 32 NFL starting tight ends, and every year in college football there are maybe 5 or 6 guys that'll ever be anything, right? So why would you build an offense around a tight end in college football? It doesn't make sense. But if you are one of these teams like Iowa, right, where you are not getting the tippy top athletes at wide receiver, halfback, and so forth, and you're playing in a conference where you're not going to get killed for not having those guys at those positions, and you run a pro style offense, I do think you develop fullbacks and tight ends better than other schools do.
I agree.
So that's maybe a little bit of a thing to think about. And if you're thinking about college football, free advice for everybody who's trying to run college football teams: if your path to greatness is to try to get players in the NFL, think about those edges as opposed to trying to develop the 80 millionth wide receiver, because Ohio State's already a full round ahead of you in that. So that's just something I thought about. Did that at all come into your mind when you were scouting players or picking players when you were a team builder?
Yep, no question about it. I mean, systems, schematic approaches. Again, what I had mentioned earlier, the ability to sit down with Bill Belichick, or Mike Smith, or Dan Quinn over these last 20 years. No question that came up. So without beating your point to death, I really like what you're saying about it. I think there's definitely merit in it.
Yeah, Sage has always talked to me about wanting to like put the Shanahan offense into a college system. I'm like, well, you got to sell it somehow, and I think selling it would be to say we're going to develop players to play that system. Now, Sage, by the way, was Brock Purdy's offseason quarterback coach, and he taught them because Sage played for Kyle in Houston, and then of course like there was the connection. It's kind of cool how that all came together, and maybe that can be a thing for other positions. Last but not least, Darnell Washington. 6'6.5", 264, a big guy, power forward, basically. If now that basketball season's over, 4.64 in the 40, 31-inch vertical, which isn't that high, but it's above 30, so it's passable. 10.2-inch broad, 4.08 shuttle, which is very good for a tight end. He obviously had to contend with Brock Bowers. He played on the same college football team as another guy who is one of the better tight ends in all of college football, who's still an underclassman. Almost 11 yards average depth of target, under 7% drop rate. So checks a lot of boxes. Very big kid. This is kind of, I think, a wild card one, right? Because I think a team that takes him, uses him properly, they're going to be like, holy crap, this guy's a unicorn type player. Why did he last until round 2? And yet I think that there are reasons why he's all the way down to where he is, sort of in the expected data here. We have him about pick 34. So right at the beginning of the second round per grinding the mocks.
So I would say, a lot of people around here in Atlanta and Georgia area say, as amazing as he is, he's not even the best tight end on the University of Georgia team, which is a whole other topic, right? It doesn't really matter what it is. Special project, huge man. You sit there and you think about projecting him in certain situations to be on the O line if he needs to. Of course, he's strong, he's big. He's still got his areas that he needs to learn. It's not like he is another guy. He's not firing off the ball with this unbelievable explosiveness. He can ease into it a little bit, but he covers a lot of ground. I mean, this is a big guy who has, again, some lope to him in his running style, but he is an eye catcher that way. He is one of those guys, like some quarterback out of Florida that everyone's raving about at the combine. He was a rave guy at the combine, right? People were like, look at this guy move. Yeah. Look at him run that 4.6 something at his size, right? That's something where, you might think during the year, you might have thought, okay, maybe this guy gets that into the third round. And I have to share that with you, right? You sit there with your team and you get excited. And you're like, God, if we could only get this guy in the third round. When you're setting up your scenarios, with your personnel directors and your head coach, you're like, we need a tight end, but we don't want to go after a tight end in the second round because we also need a corner there. God only help us if this guy lasts to the third round. Maybe he lasts. And then you just get jolted. You're like, what are we thinking? There's no way he's lasting to he would last until the third round. He's going to be in the middle of the second round, maybe, or at the latest. And you're going to have to trade up, which leads me into this is when I needed a product like Sumer's Marvel. Give me some viability, right? And just let me know how far I really do have to move up to get this tight end before he gets snapped off the board. I will say I like him. He's going to be a grow guy. There's going to be some growing pains there, of course.
Yeah, and I think there's a really good question here from Oliver, who is joining us from YouTube. How much better needs a tight end compared, to a wide receiver? I think this is a little translated, considering surplus value during his rookie contract. And of course, that is the big thing. I just got off with Jack Jones right before this call. We're talking about, trades and surplus value and all that. But the fact of the matter is, right now, the NFL's highest paid tight end in average per year in millions is Darren Waller at $17 million. The highest paid wide receiver is, depending upon how you slice it, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams in that 28 to 30, 25 to 30 range, right? So, essentially, like Christian Kirk is making $20 million a year, and Christian Kirk's a nice wide receiver, but he's not upper tier, right? So if you draft an average wide receiver at a certain draft position, that player is going to have more surplus value than the tight end drafted in the same position will be, just because of what, and we were talking with Jack about this last night, exchange rates, right? You talk about currency, like I can buy more tight end with my money than I can buy wide receiver with my money. And so, Travis Kelce makes roughly $15 million a year. So I can buy 2 Travis Kelce's with what I buy with 1 Tyreek Hill. And that, when you think about drafting these guys, it's not necessarily like the hit rate. It's more of what the assets are worth. And if I take a first round pick and I draft a tight end with it, I am now foregoing the opportunity to draft a wide receiver with it. And because you can't access wide receivers in free agency all that readily, that is the opportunity cost, which is high. Whereas if I take a wide receiver, like let's say your Falcons took the wide receiver at 4, right, with Jamar Chase, and then they came up the following year and said, oh crap, like we don't have a tight end, right? They could go in free agency and access a tight end that's not going to be as good as Pitts. Don't get me wrong. But you can get 80% of Kyle Pitts on the open market for relatively cheap. They can't get 80% of Jamar Chase on the open market for cheap. That's kind of when you think about currencies, that's a difficulty there. And that, of course, with Sumer Sports and all of our great modeling, obviously the teams that work with us will see that.
Well said. I love it. And look, the conversations last night with Jack were definitely multi-layered, of course, because when you start talking about currencies and where we are, again, you can fold this back in and take your chance to take the next 20 seconds before we get off and talk about, Sumer Sports and where we're going to be with this, because it's going to be a special addition, I think, an augmentation, as we mentioned, to a general manager that may be looking at it with a little more of a myopic lens. Now we continue to open them up a little bit and realize there is more here to dig into and make your decisions off of, how you're going to build, of course.
Yeah, we're just, what you want to be able to do. And I think that this is a freeing thing, right? Like the best part of doing this podcast with you, Thomas, is that you have such a way of, I think I get to 80% of the final answer with my statistics and my, knowledge of the game and everything. And yet, like, you're required to get from 80 to 100%, right? For us to get, if you and I, if I'm building models, right? And I think Ted Knutson, the CEO of StatsBomb, said this perfectly today. He's like, you're still going to need the human element, right? And if everybody has the statistics, the human element is where the money is made. What we want to do, right, is we go to, at Sumer Sports is give you that first 80 and hopefully 90 and 95%. But that last 5% is going to be the hard-worn, gifts that you have from working in the league back to, your time as a scout with, Cleveland and Kansas City and Detroit, and then, your time running with New England. Like, that is hard-worn. Let the math do the first 95%, not the last 95%. It's sort of my hope. And again, I think it's essential because there are so many things where, and I think we see it every time when we run this show. It's like, I get to you to 80% and then you take the last 20. And that to me gives a whole evaluation of the player. That's what I think we're promising the decision makers.
Well, look, while we're talking about this, I don't want to get too far ahead of our skis, so to speak. But the reality is Sumer Sports is in a really interesting spot and an exciting spot for me as a former general manager and a longtime scout. The fact that we and Mr. Jones has given us the go-ahead to hire an internal scouting staff with almost 200 years potentially experience in the National Football League scouting. This is a big deal because we take all that we're doing here and we have our own internal grading system that we can use in all of our models as well, which is going to be an important part of growing. We haven't finalized it yet, but we are very excited. As you know, we're excited about this group, a personnel director and scouts, being able to work with people like you with great knowledge and data, as well as, Sean Clement and Scott Nessler and Udit and Pavel. I mean, all of these people, where we're going to go with this potentially with having some really good scouts in our system can be really positive. Back to your point of making sure that we have the right element of human, not too much, because we're not saying they're overriding, but they're contributing. It's going to be really cool to see.
Yeah, and like I said, I think the whole point is let the human expertise be the final nail and not the first one, because I think that to me is where it can make the most impact and where its impact can have the most value, which is sort of at the end and being that final decision maker. Like I think that decision, team builders are in a really good place to understand making that final decision. By the way, we got a really cool comment here. Chandler Russell. I don't want to get us in trouble on YouTube, so I'm effing ecstatic to be here at the ground floor of the Sumer Sports Show. And you guys are all there, by the way. So as we wrap up today, this was really good. We only had like one technical snafu. I think things were okay. So thank you for bearing with us as we are kind of, working through the tech here of trying to produce a good podcast. But yes, you all are on the ground floor here. Thank you to all of our friends, Nick Wan, Tim Keller, people who have watched us on Twitch today for the first time. If you like what you see, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Help us get to as many followers as we can. Follow us on Twitter at Sumer Sports. And of course, if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, subscribe, rate, review. It really does help us. It really does. We do take the feedback that you guys give us to heart and to try to make this show better. So for Thomas Dimitrov, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 45 of the Sumer Sports Show.